Good morning and good evening to the audience and our speakers for the 5th Transatlantic AI Exchange web session. Today is Tuesday, October 5th, 2021. I'm Thomas Neubert. I'm born and raised in Germany, a longtime entrepreneur living in Silicon Valley for 30 years now and working at Intel's headquarters in Santa Clara around topics related to artificial intelligence and also the data center of the future. We are again super excited bringing together today's industry experts and connecting them with the up and coming German AI ecosystem. If you attended any of our previous sessions, today's session is very unique considering the topic and the speakers. Now, first, allow me to provide a quick overview of this Transatlantic AI Exchange initiative. The Transatlantic AI Exchange is a platform that aims to accelerate and expand the transatlantic knowledge exchange in the human-to-machine economy, what we call the so-called fourth industrial revolution. We do foster exchanges on artificial intelligence and create the grounds for entrepreneurs, for researchers, for the universities, for investors, corporations, and also the German Mittelstand and policymakers to build long-term partnerships. As always, a huge big thank you to our founding members, Petra, Ragnar, and also Oliver from AI Hamburg, who joined me in this journey very early on. We couldn't do this without sponsors. Therefore, I'd like to thank our platinum sponsors, Taylor Wessing, and gold sponsors, the German consulate in San Francisco, and also our local partner, GABA, the German American Business Association. We have already secured 2 impressive upcoming events and are excited about the topics and the experts supporting our program. For more details and to secure a slot, feel free to sign up right after today's event. For 2022, we will focus even further on use cases and opportunities around climate change, sustainability, healthcare, but also topics like AI progress in Germany, the US, and China, and industrial AI advanced manufacturing, just to name a few. If you believe our event is of value to you and your network, we greatly appreciate you share and like us on our LinkedIn page as well. If anyone has transatlantic or AI-related topics of any sort, please reach out to us and we will consider building them into the upcoming program. We really like to hear from you, all of you, to offer the most relevant programs possible. So as you can see on the screen here, just scan the QR code with your mobile phone or participate online. The URL will be posted in the chat during the sessions in a few minutes. It will not interrupt the Zoom sessions, so you can do things in parallel. At the end of this original scheduled 16-minute sessions, we will provide a new Zoom link in the chat to open up a 30-minute networking opportunity for people who are interested. However, due to the richness of the topic and the information being shared by the speakers, we decided to extend the initial session by around 10 to 15 minutes to cover all topics we have on the agenda. This still gives us around 15 to 20 minutes for networking and QA. My apology in advance, but please stick around if time permits. Okay, now comes the fun part. Let me hand it over to my friend Olaf Groth, who has graciously committed his time to moderate the session. Olaf, with that, I would like to hand it over to you. Thank you, and everybody enjoy.
Thank you very much, Thomas, and thank you to Transatlantic AI Exchange and AI Hamburg for their organizing this event. And of course, to all of our participating panelists here, we have indeed a world famous, as it were, and I'm not overstating the point, panel of experts here for you today. Let me just introduce myself real quick. I am the CEO of Cambrian Futures. You can find us at cambrian.ai, and I'm a professor of strategy and innovation at Hult International Business School and at UC Berkeley Haas School of Business. But I'm not the main show today. The main show today are our panelists. And without further ado, I will just introduce them really briefly so you have an idea of the caliber that is coming at you here. We have a fairly fast-paced program of lightning talks. To begin with, Leah Shanley, who is the CEO and president of ICSI, the model that we'll be studying today. And as I call it, a serial science entrepreneur who's got lots of experience setting up new initiatives of this and other types between the worlds of science, business, and policy. Next then will be Vern Paxson, who is not only a professor of electrical engineering and computer science at UC Berkeley, but also a shining example of one of the entrepreneurial successes that came out of ICSI, being the co-founder and chief scientist of CoreLight Inc., and he will talk to us more about how that worked and what CoreLight does. Next then is somebody quite famous in his own right, Wolfgang Walster, who is a professor of computer science hailing from Germany, but traveling and advising globally. He is the founding director and former longstanding CEO of DFKI, which is a very interesting hybrid private-public sector model in and of itself, and is on the board of ICSI as well. And he's got too many honors in his name for me to do justice to within a minute or two. And then we have Damian Bort, who is professor of machine learning and AI at St. Gallen University, also the director of the Institute for Computer Science there. Damian and I go way back as well, as we interviewed him for our book, Solomon's Code. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And without further ado, I will hand over to Leah, who will talk to us about the outlines of ICSI, and then we'll dive in.
Wonderful. Thank you, Olaf. Thank you, Thomas. So as Olaf mentioned, I'm Leah Shanley. I recently joined ICSI in January and very excited and honored to be presenting to you briefly here. Next slide. The International Computer Science Institute was founded in 1988 through a joint effort by the University of California, Berkeley, and the German Federal Laboratory for Computer Science. It was founded with the mission to advance computer science research through international collaborations. Next slide. We are one block from the University of California, Berkeley's campus, and collaborate very closely with many of the research labs on campus, including the RISE lab, Citrus, Blues on experimental security, and the Berkeley lab, Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. But we're also not far from San Francisco and Silicon Valley. Next slide. We have an illustrious group of researchers at our institute, many of whom are IEEE and ACM award winners. Next slide. And some of whom, including Professor Scott Shanker and Vern Paxson, who's here with us today, are also ACM and IEEE fellows. Next slide. We have a long-standing German visitors program where postdocs and in some cases more advanced or senior research scholars come for a year or 2 years at ICSI to collaborate on research initiatives. Next slide. And many of them, including Robin Summer and Damien, have collaborated on startup companies, which we'll be talking about today. So if you have any interest in learning more about it the International Computer Science Institute, or ICSI as we call it, we'd love to hear from you, and possibly there's some opportunities for collaboration. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Leah. Very compact, very exciting outline there. We're now going to listen to Vern, who is doing exciting work on the intersections of networks and security, as well as AI, and who I think encapsulates very nicely the very hands-on nature of some of the research that is sponsored by ICSI in collaboration, in transatlantic collaboration. Vern, over to you.
And of course, I have this stupid muting problem. Okay, good morning and good evening, folks. I'm really pleased to be here and have this opportunity to briefly sketch the exciting possibilities at ICSI. The network and security group is been long established. We started it in 1999. I'm the current head of it, and initially it was funded by AT&T, and then the dot-com bubble burst, and we switched to funding from government sources, primarily the National Science Foundation. So we were only a year old, and we had our first German scholar join. And over time in the group, there have been quite a few folks. And all of this primarily made possible by DAAD, which was terrific, just this pipeline of excellent researchers who would come and work with the group. And also some funding from the Bavarian California Technology Center to enable collaborative visits between Berkeley and Germany. So I'll come back to this list of folks in a moment. Let me briefly sketch the scope of what we've been doing, and then I'll focus on one particular research thrust. The group has done a bunch of pure networking, internet design. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to focus on our cybersecurity. Early on, we looked a lot at internet scale threats, worms in particular, starting 2001, and then botnets. The work on botnets led to infiltration, which meant that we would get our own systems inside the botnets in order to measure them, occasionally to manipulate them. And then later we would do infiltration work on cybercrime underground markets in order to measure the economic exchanges happening and to sometimes make purchases. All of this enabled us to study the economics of spammers. How do they make money? And in particular, how can we best disrupt their ability to make money? And that turned out to be, interestingly, through their bottleneck on credit card processing. We've done a bunch of work looking at censorship, primarily by China, though other countries as well, measuring how it's done and devising mechanisms to circumvent it. We've had ongoing efforts looking at government surveillance of opponents. This is by abusive governments, repressive governments that are trying to put spyware on the devices of activists who are speaking out against the governments. This occurs throughout the world and is actually fueled by an industry that makes the software. And so we've been mapping out how that industry deals with their customers, their nominal ethics and violations of those ethics. We've looked at how social networks can be used for political manipulation. This is not new. 10 years ago, this already occurred in Russia, trying to quell dissent. And we were able to map out how that was done using fake accounts. And then subsequently, working with Twitter, we were able to find and delete millions of fake accounts. So Twitter did not want us to use the exact number, so we just leave it at millions. We've looked a bunch at how to defend modern enterprise networks against threats such as spear phishing and lateral movement. And then an ongoing effort has been an open source project originally called Bro, now called Zeek. I'm just going to use both those words. And that I want to briefly talk about now. I began working on the system in 1995, and over time, the system has grown. We've received a great deal of support from primarily the National Science Foundation in the US, and then also the Department of Energy, totaling $8 or $9 million in order to turn it into something industrial strength. And it took a long time, but today you can go to zeek.org and you'll see that it is a vibrant open source tool, and in particular, it has taken off. We moved it to GitHub back in 2014 or so, and it just steadily picks up fans. It is used by pretty much any large enterprise that needs to know what's going on inside its networks. These are some that have been either publicly talked about using Zeek or do like job postings that are looking for Zeek expertise. And we were really thrilled that in 2016, when the National Science Foundation was putting together its request to Congress for its budget and was highlighting all the great stuff that had happened previously, for example, hunting for gravity waves, they also highlighted Zeek as a triumph that the NSF particularly wanted to showcase. So back to this list. These folks, all German scholars, as I mentioned. So there've also been some entrepreneurship. Matthias Valentin, PhD student of mine, founded Tensor in Hamburg 3 years ago. Robin and I and one other colleague founded Corelight, and we had this modest funding up through 2016, facilitated by ICSI. And then we started to grow. And in fact, Johanna and Christian joined. And today we have quite a bit more funding. So we have grown explosively. It's been really exciting. And the company is on a trajectory I really couldn't have imagined working on the open source project all those years. Hugely gratifying to see the impact that the project can have and the opportunities. And I will finish there.
Thank you very much, Vern. Congratulations. That is quite the success story and quite the hockey stick there in terms of revenue. And of course, thanks to Leah as well for running such an exciting organization. As I foreshadowed in the chat thread, we want to do sort of a quick stopover here now, right? Because nothing's worse than just having, 5, 6 talking heads in one fell swoop talking at you. We'd like to speak with you. And so if the audience has any questions at this point, we'd like to do a quick dip, as we call it, and ensure that we get those answered, develop a bit of energy before we go on to Wolfgang, of course, and Damian for some broader and deeper exploration of the model. So let me just see if there is anybody here who is asking any questions. Feel free to raise your hand, and I will trust that Oliver or Thomas will call it to my attention if there's anybody raising a hand and I'm not seeing it. Currently, I don't see any questions, so I have 2 of my own, and we'll keep them very brief. The first one is really Leah and maybe then Vern. What is, obviously everybody's shown here in these slides, and of course you as panelists are about as blue chip in the science and R&D world as it comes, and you're attached to blue chip organizations. Why do you need something like ICSI? What does ICSI do for you? What does this combination of the DAAD and ICSI with your own assets and networks, what does that do that you couldn't do without ICSI? Maybe I'll go to Vern first because he sort of has that hands-on experience, and then I'll come back around to Leah for the strategic perspective.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. I think these blue chip talent is a rare thing, and does exist widely, spread out over the world, and the opportunities provided by international ties has been huge. And if I look at the output of my research career and how much of it has involved international collaboration, it has been a great deal. And that is difficult to do without some sort of nucleus to aid it along. One cannot just, reach out across the Atlantic and find a fruitful collaboration. So that's really been the heart of it for me.
Were there particular sort of pockets of expertise you were looking for? I mean, obviously it's in the nature of science that it is global, or trying to be global anyway.
Well, for me, there was in particular Professor Anja Feldman, who was at Munich and then at Berlin and now at MPI. She had similar expertise in networking and similar interests in security, and a bunch of those folks I listed were her students in various forms. So that was the key tie with her for me. And in general, I've just found that Germany is a real stronghold in Europe of truly world-class talent in my field.
Excellent. Okay. There's actually a great question here that Leah is asking that you all can see, of course, in the chat thread as well. You know, Vern, if you were if you were giving advice to an early career researcher, right, how to launch a startup, what advice would that be, and how would that involve ICSI?
So I have to chuckle at this because I am hardly the showcase early stage entrepreneur, right? It took me 20 years to take my tech to success. And I think that in general, it is so valuable in research, and I'm learning, of course, in entrepreneurship, to have a network of experienced folks to draw upon and learn from. That has been number one in my research success and what I most try to offer to others. So that would be the most I could say in that regard. It's not like I've an old hand at entrepreneurship.
Right. So leverage the network, go through the network effects. We've also seen this in artificial intelligence done really well by Canadian researchers as well, right? Trying to replicate large data pools and get to talent pockets in artificial intelligence rather than trying to rebuild the next Google and amass the power of data and compute power there. And so I think that is, so what you're saying is network. Make sure you don't just hole up in a laboratory somewhere, but go out wide and broad.
Exactly. And I've been really struck with Corelight, coming to appreciate how challenging every single aspect of the business is. And most of which I know nothing about. And I love learning about it from more experienced hands.
Great, excellent. And I will, in fact, now use this as an opportunity to go over to Wolfgang, but maybe one question to Leah real quick. Leah, what are the growth challenges that ICSI is facing? This is obviously a great model with very concrete results, right? If you had a magic wand that you could wave, right, what would you want to overcome bottlenecks or hurdles to your own growth and your mission?
Well, so first I want to redirect a little bit. I want to comment on Vern's comment about networking. At ICSI, we've had, as I threw up on the screen briefly, several research teams that have spun off as startup companies. Vern's perhaps one of the most well-known, but also Scott Shanker, he and his colleagues, collaborators with Berkeley, sold Nicira to VMware. Databricks is about to go IPO. So we have a really great ecosystem within ICSI of researchers who have extensive experience launching successful startups. We also have Skydeck, which is Berkeley's incubator accelerator, just a few floors up. So I think that kind of synergy has really helped ICSI to foster, catalyze some of these groups. The challenge for us, however, is when these groups launch and are quite successful, they often hire up our staff to help. But I see that also as an opportunity for us then to build new teams.
Excellent. All right, great. Let's move on now to, I'm sorry, Damian, I just saw your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, just a short question. I think it's really amazing seeing all those companies, and it's pretty brilliant. The numbers are really amazing. I like very much the term serious science entrepreneur. I think that's a big distinction between a regular science, regular entrepreneur. So this would be a question to Vern. Do you think this kind of business-to-business setup, the startup with the business-to-business orientation, would only be possible in such a setup where you have the time to develop the technology so that you can approach companies in a business-to-business setup?
Yeah, I can't speak broadly. I know that the success of the open source project is pretty amazing, and it made Corelight take off like it did, because we had mature tech, unlike so many startups, and we had awareness out there among these big companies about the power of the tech. On the other hand, it gives me pause, well, it took only 15 years to build that out. And so it's not like I'm going to go do another one of these when I'm done with Corelight. So yeah, it's a mixed blessing.
Great conversation already. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We do have to move on to stay on time. But again, I would ask the audience to feel encouraged to pose questions in the chat thread or raise your hands, as Damian just did. We are now moving on to a transatlantic grandmaster of artificial intelligence. Wolfgang, again, welcome to this panel. I think the question that I just asked, which is sort of, what's sort of the strategic mission and what's the benefit of ICSI to transatlantic science coordination, your presentation will answer. So I'm going to hand over to you and then Damian, and after that we'll have, of course, another extended chance to fireside chat about all of this. Wolfgang, welcome, and over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction, Olaf. Yes, my topic is Industrial AI, Germany's export hit. And I hope I can move the slides. It doesn't work right now. Yeah, now it works. Okay, and I will first start with the exchange program. Leah already gave a very good summary, but I want to add the following. Since 1988, BMBF really is sponsoring this program with ICSI. And from the beginning, DFKI was involved because actually both institutions were founded at the same time, all in 1988. And at that time, Siemens, the company Siemens, played a key role to do this. They were in the selection committee and decided not for Stanford, but for Berkeley. Both were in the finalist. And yeah, so we have 33 years of transatlantic collaboration based on research excellence. Now, on the strategic level, from the beginning, the German government, of course, was very interested to have a good return rate, which is normally not the case. When people go to the US, many people will stay. So in our case, we sent some of the most talented postdocs to ICSI, but we try to keep the connection so that 80% actually returned of these 600. And the career was really boosted because 50% of them are now university professors at German university. 50% are industrial careers, have made industrial careers or became entrepreneurs. I give you just 3 examples. Oliver Günther, who is now the president of Potsdam University, one of the best universities in Germany, was alumnus. Johannes Helbig, the CIO of DHL, everybody knows DHL, I guess. He was the German CIO of the year, also spent quite some time at ICSI and wrote his PhD thesis just before. And Wieland Tholfelder is the vice president of engineering at Google. He actually was the one who was in charge of a lot of security in the Android system. And also he worked on the Chrome browser with 700 people whom he led in Munich. Now, let me talk a little bit about Industry 4.0, because this is the concept of the fourth industrial revolution. Oliver already mentioned it. It's based on cyber physical systems. We created it in 2010 and published the first paper in 2011, so 10 years ago. So we have a decade of work on this topic, and till last year already 90,000 papers were published, quoting our paper, but also many follow-up papers. So that's really amazing. The total investment in R&D for Industry 4.0 in Europe is per year 140 billion euro. So it's really amazing that this the term catch up and the concept really was adopted worldwide. not only in the US and Japan, but also in China, for instance. We have a new special fund which was just opened for industrial AI. Again, 5 billion euro, which is quite a lot for pure research in Germany. Now, the characteristics of Industry 4.0, like mass customization, predictive maintenance, plug and produce, the real-time line balancing, online quality control is a very hot topic, all depend on AI. For instance, online quality control is done by deep learning and active sensor fusion. We have the notion of the digital twin of all objects in a smart factory, which is based on semantic web technologies. We provide smart worker assistance, which is based on automatic blend recognition, user modeling, and dual reality technology. So this is really the core. One could say AI is a key enabler of Industry 4.0. And what does it pay off for the client? When you introduce industrial AI, this means systems become more autonomous, more proactive, adaptive, hopefully explainable, self-learning, of course. And in Germany, we cared a lot about ethics by design, trustworthiness of the solution, and also, of course, these systems should collaborate with the human workers in the factory. And the strategic idea of the German government, where I was the chief consultant together with Henning Kagermann, the ex-CEO of SAP, we said we should boost export products by injecting some AI into these products so that they become smart products. This is the case, obviously, in car manufacturing, in all the manufacturing equipment, in medical equipment, in aircrafts for Airbus, home appliances, and agricultural machinery. These are the strongest export markets for Germany. And 80% of all this equipment is actually not used in Germany, but it's exported mainly to China and the US. Now, DFKI was a key player and still is in Industry 4.0. We have 600 AI researchers, 30 professors of AI, now 1,300 employees. So it's really a success story because from the beginning, this was founded as a public-private partnership. So it's not only the German government, but it's also 29 industrial shareholders. And you see, transatlantic cooperation means also that we have big players from the US, like NVIDIA, Intel, Microsoft, Google, who are on our board of trustees. They gave quite some money to DFKI sponsorship, but also every year they give contracts, research contracts to DFKI. I forgot John Deere, I should also mention this. Now, as I said, spin-off generation is one of our KPIs. So we have founded in DFKI over 100 startups. Some of them together with people who spend some time at ICSI. And I want to mention just 3, which are connected to Industry 4.0, and they had recently exits. In 2020, it was the company IOXP. It was sold to a company in Boston, PTC, quite a big company, and a company in manufacturing software. And what they do is machine learning for visual hand tracking in assembly tasks. Very important when you want to do quality control, because if you recognize that one worker does something wrong, using the wrong device or screwing the device in the wrong direction, there's an alarm. So there is incremental quality checking. This software is AI-based monitoring of construction sites and construction work. This was sold to PricewaterhouseCoopers, And finally, also in 2018, another company which was in zero-error blister production in pharmacy companies, again using machine learning. And this was sold to KPMG. I think you all know these companies. They paid a good price. And all these people who founded the companies are now millionaires or multimillionaires. In our case, this is something special, maybe in Germany and especially in DFK, we don't use a lot venture capital. So that we have growth based on projects at the beginning, so that actually the founders make most of the money, and also DFK a little bit, but no really venture capital flow. So that's interesting, and sometimes this is better for the founders. That's a little bit different, I think, to what's happening in the United States. But as you see, sometimes we have the exit using our connections to Silicon Valley. Yeah, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Wolfgang. Just two key insights here, I think, that I'm drawing out, and there are many in this talk. The first one is, ICSI and DFKI are, of course, not just for digitally native scientists, entrepreneurs, and companies, but you beautifully described how you're bridging your AI, you're injecting AI in analog or non-digital, non-AI native companies like John Deere, and you showed, of course, a lot of the car companies and Airbus, etc. And I think that is worth beholding, and I'll come back to that in our fireside chat. And then the other point you're making is that ICSI, and of course DFKI in this case, are helping, it seems, entrepreneurs to get to what's called a minimum viable product without necessarily having to hustle, for 5-10 years and bootstrap, or take venture capital and get diluted. And that's also a big advantage, I think. Yeah. Great. Well, before we chat about all this, let me go on to Damian, who will also add some depth and breadth to this, and then we'll open it up to a fireside chat between all of us.
All right, thanks a lot for that. Let me just move this over there. So yeah, so we saw great opportunities on high level startup opportunities. I will take the role a little bit from academia in the position that I was a postdoc fellow sponsored by the DAAD. So moving from ICSI to DFKI back, the return rate, and then being now a professor at the University of St. Gallen. It's quite remarkable because looking from a transatlantic AI exchange point of view, there are multiple touch points between Europe, in my personal career, and the US, which in hindsight were really significant and had impact on the development of my career. So this will be the main content. So looking at that, I also would like to highlight that my touch points are not only ICSI. So it's quite interesting that there are multiple of those touch points. I had during my time in Kaiserslautern at the university, a great opportunity to work at Columbia University as a visiting scholar, then moved back, did my PhD, started actually then to apply via a DAAD to a postdoc position at the ICSI. That brought me into that position also because of some work that I did at the Columbia University. We developed at that time the first system available for visual sentiment analysis. This was quite interesting. And we will see more at ICSI. Then had some touch point where the technology, deep neural networks, were a little bit mature. A couple of visits at the embassy in Washington, German embassy, and also at the consulate in LA, and then moved in my role here already at the University of St. Gallen to the so-called Thomas Mann House and being Thomas Mann Fellow, getting in touch with topics like transparency, bias, fairness with regard to these technologies. However, I would like to focus on a little bit on my journey at the ICSI. So what we saw here, and that was really remarkable, I started as a DAAD postdoc with Gerald Friedland here. That was the inviting entity, which was really great. But at the very beginning, what I figured out at the institute is that collaboration was very open. So it took me a couple of weeks. So I opened up collaborations with Trevor Durrell at that time and Stella Yu. So here more multimedia content and computer vision, which really allowed me to broaden my visibility and connect to the projects that I had in the past. The outcome of that, you have to imagine that the time was really amazing. It was 2012, AlexNet was published. Deep learning was something that people recognized will change the entire machine learning environment. So it was a quite remarkable time. Probably never ever will have this again in my academic career. And I was so lucky to be right in the spot. A little bit overwhelming. But what we figured out with Gerald was in the very beginning, we needed data. So what we started, and was also given this connectivity in the Bay Area, we pretty quickly established a collaboration due to Gerald's previous work at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Those guys have some of the largest computers. So we knew very much, okay, we need compute power. We knew that if we want to train those networks, at that time, we had like 8 layers, right? So that is like historical classical papers, although they're only 6 years away. We need also data. So we started a collaboration with the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and Yahoo and Flickr to release a data set that was the biggest created data set at that time. So this data set was composed of 100 million images and videos, every single image on Flickr that was Creative Commons. It was published at the Communication of ACN cover image here, as you can see. And this data set really gave us, with regard to computer vision, the capability to learn larger models at that time. That was the large question. This model, or this data set, is currently still in use. All the self-supervised learning approaches and systems like CLIP or DALI from OpenAI and DeepMind, they use the data set and the sentences inside of the data set to do all this amazing research. Data is the core of it. And that was one of the major impact, and continued with the work on visual sentiment analysis from Columbia, which was by surprise a collaboration also from Shifu Chang at Columbia University and Trevor Durrell at ICSI. So the world is small. We ported at that time the entire system that we published that was traditional machine learning, support vector machine driven, on deep neural networks. And believe me, my PhD advisor at that time chased me in Germany, Thomas Breuel, who is currently working at NVIDIA. You have to try deep neural networks. I was not believing those approaches are working out. And at the time in Berkeley, I figured out that this is the way to go. So we had the first neural networks running sentiment analysis. We had the large data. And by some surprise, I got in contact with Stella. We got in touch with something you're always thinking academically and maybe with regard to entrepreneurship, but going beyond, going to how can we use AI or machine learning beyond commercial purposes, like for the good. And here, one project that Stella was currently involved that I got hooked on was detection of wildfires, not only from social media posts, but also from satellite data. So these 3 touch points and research direction actually formed the remaining research direction that I'm currently working on. Moving back to the DFKI, I was lucky to get the mandate from Wolfgang Barster to open up the Deep Learning Competence Center with the cross-sectional setup being a connection between Saarbrücken, Kaiserslautern, Bremen, Berlin at that time. Knowing how powerful large machines are with the data, we needed compute power. So we also tried to get very close in collaboration with NVIDIA, got contact to Jensen Huang, the CEO, and convinced NVIDIA actually to invest in one of the 2 AI research centers from NVIDIA's point of view, which was then the DFKI. So we were able to set up the standards for exploring all the opportunities that were ahead of. And the second was exploring really the opportunity of going for this AI for social good. Can we use these technologies, slide data, and particularly here, a lot of this data is freely available also for commercial use in a setup of first wildfire detection and then floodings. So at that time, the idea was really, can we help the emergency teams, the emergency response team at the ground? Like, this area is flooded, don't use your truck, use a boat. We really wanted to get out this technology. What was interesting is, however, that the reinsurance companies, they were actually hooked up because they really much needed this first response information. So we started with something for good, and we ended up actually in having some interesting setups. And I will speak a little bit about startups that developed out of it. And that brought us actually, or brought me personally, to the situation at, or to the position at the University of St. Gallen. I recognized that we're moving now from laboratory environments into the real world. These products will interact with us and others. So currently doing much self-supervised learning, just got last week a NeurIPS paper accepted, using this data set, training model zoos. So we're not training one model that is good, we're training model zoos that we can learn representations from, to learn about the properties, the behavior. We can test models with other test data, predict the version and their identification. I think is the key for any regulation that will come in Europe, and the European Commission decided to regulate or identify neural networks. Continued actually one step further from wildfire to floodings. The next step was climate monitoring. We are able now to really identify power plants that run by fossil fuels, and really from the smoke plumes and the segmentation of the smoke plumes detect or calculate and estimate how much they produce electricity, and then estimate their CO2 footprint worldwide. So this is the amazing part about satellite data. And last but not least, also went into financial data, which brought us for anomaly detection, also in discussion with here at particular Stella, analysis of financial fraud in transaction data like SAP systems. So this is academic. So this is this science part and the deep tech understanding really the technology, but then startups emerged out of that. So I founded Sociovastics Labs out of the idea of measuring sentiment with regard to sustainability and sustainable finance topics, so so-called environmental social governance investment. A company was founded that I was involved, Vision Pools, here from this work that emerged also. So two very talented PhD students that finished, they are running now the company. And currently we're also discussing with this to develop and evolve that into a company, because we strongly believe neural networks will need versioning, will need identifications, and therefore in the context of trust AI, this is a great opportunity. And this would be also the last slide from my side, and I would hand over then to Olaf.
Thank you, Damian. Another tour de force. I'm seeing a lot of interesting logos, and we want to hone in on some of that now. I just want to introduce this next segment now of our webinar here, and again, invite the audience, and I see some nicely intense interaction there. Thank you very much, Sesame and others, for chiming in. Please keep it coming. We are now going to engage in a fireside chat, and that means that we're going to have a discussion, and we're going to try to moderate this as best as we can, because we have, very high-powered people here on this chat thread, and I'm sure everybody has a very important opinion on each one of these questions. Let me ask one micro question, and then lift up a bit and ask a more macro question about the focus of these research areas. So the micro question is, both you, Wolfgang, and Damian, you showed a lot of logos, and apparently there's a lot of connectivity between ICSI research and applications on the industrial side. Can you walk me through maybe one example briefly of how a company like John Deere or BMW or NVIDIA, for that matter, how does this dialogue start? What role does ICSI play in this? And maybe I'll start with Wolfgang, since he had a lot of very prominent logos on there.
Let me start with the automotive industry example. When I was visiting ICSI every year, I of course connected also to the BMW research lab in Silicon Valley, and tried to connect them to ICSI, because they didn't know it. So I organized a visit to ICSI at that time. Then we had a very big funded project between Germany and the US, ICSI, It was 25 million euro. So ICSI was also paid for this. This was a contract research project, and BMW was involved. That was the first phase. And then we developed various systems for BMW, interactive systems. And one is now, again, a startup company, and it's a product. It's a system which allows you to interact with your car, both with gesture and at the same time with eye gaze and speech. So when you look out of your window of the car, look at a building and say, what is this? Then the system will answer, this is, I don't know, Empire State Building. Anyway, so new multimodal interaction. This was a big program which I did with Morgan. Morgan was a long-term time director at ICSI, a specialist in speech, and I added the multimodal interaction. And the company also had a very good exit 2 years ago.
So Wolfgang, that's and I'll maybe also look at Leah here. You can't see me looking at you, Leah, but I will. That's BMW is obviously already fairly high tech, right? Maybe yes. Not on AI and data science. It's coming, but maybe not yet. But if you have a company like John Deere, which the average person would perceive as very low tech. No. Is it right? So maybe correct that vision, but then also when you have counterparts that aren't as techified yet, is the dialogue different? And does ICSI help bridge that?
I would say, especially John Deere is really a high-tech company. If you go to John Deere tractor, it's like Airbus or Boeing aircraft, very complex, and they do the smart farming, and so no problem. But you are right. Sometimes we have companies. These are mostly smaller companies, the typical German Mittelstand, and here it's very good if you have enough showcases. I mean, at DFK and also at ICSI, I always pushed demo or die mentality, a little bit like MIT Media Lab. You have to demo something, especially for these guys who are more or less non-technical and want to see more or less the effect of such a system and not so much the internal working.
Got it. Okay. Leah, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would add, in my experience, I completely agree with Wolfgang. It's the small and medium enterprises that really need the assistance. I think also, in addition to what Wolfgang said with demoing, which is spot on, is embedding grad students with these companies as well. Previously, I've run internship programs with small and medium companies around data science, where they didn't have the data science capacity before we started. And by the end of the year, they wanted to hire the students and build that into their product development. So I could see ICSI, has a history of doing this, and we will continue that in the future.
I think that is a key point that both of you are making, because the problem that we're always seeing with the small and mid-sized companies is that they cannot afford the price tags of a cutting-edge Stanford, Berkeley, Karlsruhe, whatever, PhD in artificial intelligence, right? I remember being part of a discussion group with the German president at Stanford, and the host ran late to the prep meeting because the PhD dissertation hearing had run over. And he couldn't keep the PhD student at Stanford for a tenure track role because Facebook had offered him $1 million, right? And the average Mittelstands company or a small mid-sized company here can't afford to hire a lot of those. And so embedding these graduate students seems like a really good recipe to get them immersed in the culture and see what other than cash, what other benefits there are working for a small mid-sized company, right? That's a great answer. Damian, yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. When you think about it, I guess Vern already mentioned that having a product out there, if it's open source, right, allows you really to convince people and to gain a lot of trust without engaging. So this is a very important component. And interacting with industry, I mean, one of the most difficult things, I think, is the translation of the business problem into a computer science, or in my case, AI problem. So here you have to, I'm making the distinction between people. There was a time where people in the industry had budgets and were looking for business cases. So they were at the very beginning, where should we go? What is doable? Here, these people are very early on, so they need a lot of guidance. And there you have the other type of companies that are already, they understand the problem, they're looking for a solution. If they're able to find a solution, for example, in open source, and there is a company supporting that and giving you the full-fledged service, that's the situation where you can straightforwardly get to a setup where the thing is not only bought for the project, but is an integral part of the entire infrastructure. I think there's a big differentiation between those two things. And in particular, like small, medium enterprises, and we have a lot of here in the Rhine area, in particular family businesses, they need a lot of time to be convinced. They are not buying everything that is fancy, but they need to solve problems. And those are the ones that stick with your technology and your product. So I think those are the ones difficult to convince, but once you're in, then you have a really loyal client or customer.
So it seems like what you're saying, Damian, there's also a bit of education and a bit of a relationship development here, trust creation, that an institution like ICSI can provide, where maybe others who are more in a rapid venturing mode maybe don't have the luxury or don't feel like providing, right?
Fully agree, yeah.
Let me ask a question. I'll start with Vern first on the cutting edge of AI frontiers now that maybe ICSI will be taking on. And then I'll ask a more provocative question about, doing something that is maybe less for-profit oriented, right? Some big problems for society. Vern, where do you see, and maybe for your particular area, or you could comment more broadly, where do you see the cutting edge of AI that ICSI can really make a dent here? And if you want to go with cybersecurity in the related realm, that's fine too.
Yeah, I'll stick to that realm because that's really where I've got some perspectives on this. I think, so a decade ago, Robin Summer, my co-founder, and I wrote a paper essentially on why it's really hard to use AI for detecting attacks. And a lot of the elements of that remain true. But there's still this opportunity with this vast amounts of data to apply machine learning. And what I think really the cutting edge is figuring out, of shifting the task from, it's not the job of the machine learning to completely figure out the security issue. It's the job of the machine learning to give excellent starting points, data, context to the human analyst, who will then complete that loop. I think we'll see this shift in a lot of applications of AI where they are assisting. They're not doing the whole thing task. Some tasks, sure, they can do the whole thing, and others, they're better suited for really being powerful assistants to humans who have some context that's just beyond what we know how to get machine learning to do by itself. So that's what I'm excited about.
It seems to me that as we sort of take more of an ecosystem and supply chain view of cybersecurity in IoT and in the fourth industrial revolution, like Wolfgang was saying, we widen the array of attack points and attack vectors. And, the human analyst needs that help from AI to create that contextual awareness, right? To track and really preempt these threats. There's also seems to be, a need on the part of CDOs, CSIOs to figure out, what data is actually at risk here and how do I protect that? And that analytics is a gargantuan task that most companies aren't doing well, much less the ones that we just discussed, small and medium size.
Yep, exactly.
Great answer. Thank you, Vern. Wolfgang, you have your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to add that I see a very big potential for ICSI in the field of 5G and 6G, because 5G is already depending a little bit on AI, but 6G is totally dependent. So without AI methodology, you cannot run a 6G network as it's envisioned now. And I think these skills, we have an excellent networking group. Vern already mentioned that the security group emerged over time from the networking group, and Scott Schenker, of course, course, is the top guy in networking in the US. And so this fits very nicely, 6G, and called sometimes the tactile internet. And also the new idea of Scott, I think, is excellent, so-called extensible internet. So next generation internet combined with AI, I think it would be something which would be unique for ICSI, because no other, I think, university or institute in the US can compete. You have an advantage. It's a special area, but I think it's very good. And I think also for companies like Intel, but also Deutsche Telekom and so on. So telecommunication industry is still very healthy.
Let me hook in there, Wolfgang. That's 5G, 6G is, of course, a very tricky area these days because of geopolitics. And we often talk about technology at the center of, it's a stupid label, but the Cold War 2.0, and I really don't like using it. Do you see, a special role for ICSI there because it's transatlantic, right? As almost like a trust creator, or is that creating an unnecessarily wall vis-a-vis China?
Yeah, I think China is a special problem, but I think now with Biden, I think the new administration, I think the relationship, at least with Europe, is much better. So I see no problem to have a very good intensive cooperation on 6G between the US and Europe. China is a special thing, but I think in the long run, if it comes to internet and telecommunication, you cannot separate out one country. I think it's nonsense. You need really international standards. You need a global standards. We have seen this even in the first mobile phones. It was a big mistake of Japan to have a special standard for 2G. Yeah, and they had to finally they adopted the European standard and so on. So I think this is nonsense. And I don't believe we have very good security people like Vern. Why shouldn't we work with the Chinese, but also, of course, check for security? I'm against the banning of one country.
Yeah, because otherwise you end up with at least two competing standards yet
Exactly.
Again and again, right? Whereas China has 1.4 billion, but then there's also the Belt and Road,
right,
and it's promulgating its standards there. And the US and Europe are trying to create this other model.
yes,
And then what about interoperability and the global data market, et cetera, et cetera?
Right.
I think that's a brilliant comment.
Agreed.
Yeah. If any of you, Damian, Vern, or Leah, want to comment on this as well, please unmute yourselves. Otherwise, I will go on to what might have to be our final question. And that is, so we talk a lot about for-profit type ventures. And I'm going to be deliberately a little bit provocative here, right? But a famous US venture capitalist said, look, we wanted flying cars and we got 160 characters, okay? And his point was, we keep investing in, and again, I'm being deliberately a bit provocative here, in candy for the brain rather than tackling the world's toughest problems. Aren't there other horizons that are maybe more important for society on, climate change, migration, right? I mean, cybersecurity is obviously a big one as well. How do you feel about that? What is ICSI doing in those areas? And I don't know if, Leah, that's maybe first you, and I don't know if Damian is doing any interesting work here. Please feel free to raise your hand.
Damian, do you want to go first?
Up to you. So I know from the discussions when I was at ICSI that was a topic where we really looked into how can we help if there are natural disasters where building or structures are damaged? Can we investigate if there is a need for redo? So this is a topic, and I think in particular in the Bay Area, this is even more important. We are very much aware of the datafication of our environments, and this can be used in multiple times. And I would like to highlight that there is no exclusion of going for the one or the other, because very often they are walking hand in hand, as we already recognize that very good ideas that are for maybe initially non-commercial purpose might turn into a product or service that might benefit and be commercial or monetized at the end. So that's not an exclusion. I think it's very important to, when we look into Sustainable Development Goals, for example, from the United Nations, 17 goals, each of that goals can benefit from data, can benefit from automation, and then can also turn into probably a setup where you can monetize that. That would be my very strong opinion about this particular question.
That's a great point too, right? Artificial distinction between, public good and private good, right? Yeah, especially in artificial intelligence. Leah, did you want to add anything on to this?
Well, I would just add the work that Vern had been conducting over the last 20 years is continuing at ICSI with a new generation of researchers. So, for example, researchers at ICSI in our usable privacy and security group are conducting research around privacy issues, around issues of authoritarian regimes and surveillance, and we're building collaborations with Citrus at University of California, Berkeley, and their work with Janet Napolitano and others. So that's a major thrust at ICSI. Vern, do you want to comment maybe on the privacy work as well that ICSI's been doing over the last decade?
Sure, a couple comments. One is that I find often the really excellent researchers in security and privacy are really at heart fueled by that public good. So no one really on our team was, let's build the tech that's going to turn into a great company. That opportunity, as was observed, it arose, excellent. But a lot of the energy really comes from that. Let's tackle these problems. And in the privacy work that Leah was just mentioning, there's this trajectory of the research was, hey, we're creeped out that our phones appear to be leaking information about us. How can we measure that? And the early work was all about measuring it and publicizing it. And then came the entrepreneurial opportunity, which is, gee, this is actually a service people want to know. There's a real need to then make that measurement ongoing and industrial strength. So I think there's lots of great synergies there. And I always tell my students, I am a deep believer in do what you're passionate about, and other things will follow from it. And keep your eyes open and be opportunistic when these opportunities do come. We founded Corelight simply to keep the open source project alive. We didn't, that was our modest ambition, some sort of little revenue stream to help the project. And then, our eyes were opened and we're like, wow, there's great need for this. So I really think the synergies and interplays are sometimes serendipitous, but I'm a believer that they will arise.
Let me mention one thing, however. I think in the long run, ICSI also has to go back to more funding from DARPA, and that's the other side, DARPA and the European Commission, because NSF, of course, they fund more, basic projects, and but they are smaller, and the overhead rates, there is a problem if you only depend on NSF. I think Vern and Scott did an excellent job on this, but I think this is not sustainable for all subfields of AI. So I think DARPA is also important. I should mention this. And DARPA not only, as we all know, funds military applications, but a lot of applications, especially also in disaster management and so on. So I think we hope that in DARPA new programs will come up, because I think they are important for institutes like ICSI. We also had a lot of cooperations, by the way, between SRI and ICSI, in the past. And again, SRI is a little bit larger, and DFK does a lot of contract research.
What I'm also hearing there is, diversification of funding, right? Yes, we definitely want the collaboration with DARPA, but we also want to diversify our funding sources.
Exactly.
Right, and ideally not have to depend on big capital, as it were.
Yes.
I still remember, Wolfgang, you and I did an event 5 years ago, and you showed and gave a very interesting talk on another area of, I think, social impact, and that is factory machines that recognize the human worker.
Yes.
And I want to get back to that because that's sort of the future of work, which is, of course, near and dear to our hearts, everybody's hearts, and for obvious reasons. But the idea that the smart machine and the human can actually integrate to play at a higher productivity level,
Yes.
because the AI-driven machine can recognize what the human needs and how they learn, how they work. Can you say a bit more about that? That's an exciting area.
Yes, that's very exciting. I will give a talk on Friday about this at the Volkswagen company, because more and more companies now use this model of what we call team robotics. Team robotics means, as you said, it's not just one robot and one human, but it's a team of humans, human workers, supported by a couple of robots, because all these robots all have different skills. So we already have installation in 2 factories at BMW, one in Volkswagen, doing this. This is extremely interesting. And as you say, the key problem, the fundamental problem is that the robot really has to understand the intentions, the goals, the plans of the human to really help them. Because we don't have a clocked, cooperation, which is, but the human is in command, and the robot has to recognize, how can I help and support this guy? For example, giving the right device to do some tasks, the robot grabs this and hands over to the human, who is a specialist to handle this device, just as one example.
Great. Well, thank you, Wolfgang, for that. I think that's a very powerful area, and I wish I could be part of your presentation, but maybe we can talk to you at some point later,
later.
And have you give a presentation at Berkeley or elsewhere.
Yes.
It is unfortunately time for me to cut this off. We could talk for another hour and not be done. Very interesting, thought-provoking. Maybe that calls for a second round sometime early next year. But let me maybe just summarize before handing back over to Thomas. I think, look, we heard a lot of things here on this call, and I can't possibly do them all justice. But what I'm hearing about ICSI is a connecting point. It is a hub function, because really the theme is integration. It's not separation, whether it's, integration and the fusion of, the public good with the private profit. Okay, motivations, right? Science and R&D span both, and solutions cross-fertilize. Wolfgang also made the point, look, let's not engage in unnecessarily hostile relationships between China and the transatlantic relationship, because science needs all hands on deck, and we cannot afford to have too many competing standards out there. We want the benefit of scale economies, but also public service across countries, right? And then there is the integration between science and not just big corporate, but small and medium-sized organizations that don't have necessarily the ingrained skills already in existence, or the big capital, and educating them, training them up, creating a relationship, and then making sure that they get brought into the fold innovation-wise is also a key role for ICSI. So to me, that's the overall macro theme here, and I'm grateful ICSI exists. As of course, DFKI, Citrus is another one of these models. You just mentioned it, I think, Leah. And I think these private-public sector relationships are really the way to go. Maybe we'll see more of that spring up in Asia as well, or maybe if any of you could type those in the chat thread too. With that, all that remains for me is to thank the panel very much and thank our audience for paying attention. We now have networking coming up, and with that, I'm handing back over to Thomas.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm just hugely impressed. I think what I said early on, it was a huge understatement. The content that was shared today, the complexity of the opportunities, phenomenal. So I want to thank you, obviously, Olaf, as the moderator. I want to thank all the speakers, high-class, top-notch speakers with a content that is unbelievable. So I really thank you all for that. For the rest of the people who are on this session, and my apology for running a little bit over time, Oliver or somebody from our team is now sharing the link into the second Zoom session for networking. So click on that, open it, and then close this particular one, and then I will see you in the other session. So thanks again, and let's chat a little bit in the networking session for the remaining time that we have left. Thank you.